You already know. It's time for another Uncle Lou video. Yep, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it also. And two, subscribe to this channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year. And believe it or not, some of them are even watchable. I don't know about this one. You can let me know in the comments down below after you watch it what you think about this one. But we're going to do a Notre Dame preview and a game-by-game prediction. Now, this is a series of videos that I do every offseason. I've been doing it for years. And I talk a little bit about the coaching staff, a little bit about the offense, a little bit about the defense, a little bit about last year. Then I put this year's schedule up on the screen. I go through it game by game, and I try to give you a winner and a loser for every single game of the season. And like I said, I've done a bunch of these already for this season. There's a playlist on the channel called 2022 Predictions. Click that playlist. It'll bring up a list of all the teams that I've done so far. As far as which teams I'm doing them or the order I'm doing them in or anything like that, I have a Patreon page, and every year I make a post over there asking people on the Patreon page what team they would like to see me do a preview for. And every day when I get ready to sit down and do one of these previews, I head on over to the Patreon page, I scroll through, and I pick one of the teams to do it. Up today is Notre Dame. If you'd like to check out the Patreon page, there's a link in the description of this video that will take you there. You can have yourself a look around. The season's starting in about a month, really, with week 0. So we're going to have a lot of fun on the Patreon page. Again, this year, I do game streams on the Patreon page every Saturday during the season, and it's a lot of fun. So if you're looking for a way to support the channel, the Patreon page is a great way to do it. But let's talk about Notre Dame. Now, of course, Brian Kelly is out. Marcus Freeman is in. Well, Marcus Freeman has been there for a while. He was an assistant under Brian Kelly, but now he's the head man in charge. First time head coach. This is his first head coaching job. Brian Kelly, of course, chose to leave Notre Dame after last season. He's now the head coach down at LSU. Notre Dame starting over now with Marcus Freeman. And while the cupboard is not bare at Notre Dame, they've got a lot of talent. In fact, they've got top 10 talent. One of the complaints that Notre Dame fans had about Brian Kelly was his lack of recruiting, especially in certain positions. Now, there are some positions where Notre Dame did fine. Offensive line, defensive line, tight end, right? Been a while since they had a legitimately elite quarterback, I would argue, and also the wide receiver position. They've just had a hard time getting a lot of playmakers on the outside. So recruiting is looking up for Notre Dame. Marcus Freeman is a hell of a recruiter. That's not a secret. That's been known for a while. And if you look at some of the guys Notre Dame has signed going forward in next year's class, you can tell that they're putting an emphasis on some of those positions where they lacked under Brian Kelly. Now, none of that's going to make an impact this season, right? You're dealing with a roster right now that basically is Brian Kelly's roster. Now, we do have the transfer portal nowadays, and Notre Dame did utilize the transfer portal a little bit in the offseason, and we'll talk about some of that when we start talking about their offense and their defense. But the point is, a lot of times when you have a coaching change at a school, it's because the coach got fired, and a coach gets fired usually because the team is terrible. That's not the case here. Notre Dame was a top 10 program under Brian Kelly and should continue to be a top 10 program in 2022 and beyond. It's going to come down to, can Notre Dame go from being a top 10 program to being a top 5, top 4 national title winning program, and can Marcus Freeman keep that momentum going, right, and take them kind of to the next level? And we're going to find that out over the course of the next few years. Let's take a look at Notre Dame's offense. Now, you look at their offensive line, no surprise, a really, really good offensive line. Probably 3 first-round draft picks on this offensive line. There's some serious talent there. One of the best centers in America. A young tackle that would probably get drafted in the first round right now if he was draft eligible. Some really, really good players on the offensive line. No issues there. Blocking for the quarterback. Well, like I said, Ian Book no longer there, right? Jack Cohn no longer there. They've got 2 new guys. They did both play some last year, but not a lot. I'm talking about Tyler Buckner and Drew Pine. I guess they haven't really announced who the starting quarterback is going to be. Now, my guess would be Tyler Buckner. He gives you a little bit more with his legs than Drew Pine does. And, it's not that he can't throw the ball, but he gives you more of a run-pass option, I think, than the other guy goes. That would be my guess on who gets to start. So we don't really know that much about Tyler Buckner and Drew Pine. They've like I said, they've played, but limited action last year. So a little bit of an unknown factor there at the quarterback position. And running back is another position where Notre Dame's going to have to replace a longtime starter. Kyron Williams, I believe it was, back-to-back 1,000-plus yard seasons. He's gone. Notre Dame does have some good running backs coming back this year, though. Chris Tyree and young guy Logan Diggs, I believe is the other guy's name. Now, they're going to play 3 or 4 running backs, just like every major college football program does nowadays. You really can't get by with 2 running backs anymore. People gave that up long ago. But those will be the 2 main guys. I think they'll do fine, especially running behind that offensive line. Notre Dame's team this year, to me, I know they have a new coach, so while their approach may be a little bit different, their attitude as a team may be a little bit different, reflecting more of the personality of Marcus Freeman as opposed to Brian Kelly. A lot of what we see on the field, at least in terms of talent and personnel this year, is going to look a lot like the Notre Dame, I think, that we've seen over the last 10 years. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, Notre Dame has pretty much done everything you can do in the world of college football under Brian Kelly other than win a national title. They played for a BCS national title way back in 2012. They've made the playoffs. You have to win a playoff game, but they have made the playoffs. They've made almost every major bowl game there is. And Notre Dame fans will know another reason why they're not all that upset to see Brian Kelly gone. Although they made it to all those big games, they never won one. Notre Dame actually has not won a major bowl game since, 1989? Something like that. It's been a long time. But Brian Kelly averaged 11 wins a season at Notre Dame. The talent that he brought in is still there. New coaching staff. There's reason to be excited, I think, if you're a Notre Dame fan. Now, you can't talk about Notre Dame's offense. We mentioned this before, without talking about the wide receivers. Now, let's forget about Michael Mayer for a second. Probably the best draft-eligible tight end in the country, right? Georgia's got Brock Bowers. They've got a couple other tight ends that are pretty good too and are draft-eligible, Eric Gilbert and Darnell Washington. Michael Mayer is better than those two. We can argue about who's better between Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer, so let's just say this. Michael Mayer is the best draft-eligible tight end in the country. Brock Bowers is a true sophomore. He has at least another year in college after this coming year. So you have no questions, no problems there. There's not very many players in all of college football who can cover Michael Mayer one-on-one. He's an elite weapon at the tight end position. The issues for Notre Dame, like Notre Dame fans already know, is at the wideout position. You don't really have a true standout at wide receiver. You've got a couple of young guys that you're hoping will be good. You've got the one guy that's coming back off a torn ACL that you're wondering what can he bring. It's hard to consider Notre Dame, at least in year one under Marcus Freeman, going from that 10-11 win mark where they've been for years under Brian Kelly to the 13, 14, or 15 win mark, which is what it takes to win a national title, without some help at wide receiver. When you look at Notre Dame in the biggest games that they've played, whether it be college football playoffs, BCS championships, major bowl games, the two areas where Notre Dame seems to get exposed, at least in my opinion, is their wideouts offensively and their corners defensively. Those are, I think, two major areas of concern for this new coaching staff at Notre Dame that they're going to look to improve through both recruiting and the NIL. Now, over on the defensive side of the ball, again, a similar story. If you've been following Notre Dame at all for the last few years, they always have good defensive lines, pretty good linebacker play. Maybe you can make an argument that they lack a true elite edge pass rusher, but overall their linebackers are pretty good. The defensive line really, really good. Safeties, Kyle Hamilton, I believe was the first safety taken in last year's NFL draft. You got to try to replace him. They brought a transfer in to do that from Northwestern. It's the cornerback position at Notre Dame that has to improve. They don't have a lot of depth there. Most of the talent that they have is young and unproven. We'll see how it performs in 2022. And I think that's going to be the key to Notre Dame's season, like it is almost every year. When I look at this Notre Dame team, I have the same kind of three questions that I have almost every single year that I've looked at Notre Dame since I've been doing this. What kind of play are we going to get out of the quarterback? Can they find an elite playmaking wide receiver on the outside? And are Notre Dame's corners going to be able to match up when they face an elite passing attack with NFL wide receivers? If the answer to all three of those questions is yes, if they get great corner play, if they can find some true playmaking wide receivers, and they get really good quarterback play, the sky's the limit for Notre Dame. The questions are, can they get those things year one under Marcus Freeman? I would argue probably not. I mean, I don't think this is going to be a national title season for Notre Dame, but there's no reason to think that Notre Dame can't have a really, really good season. Let's put the schedule up on the screen and see what kind of record Notre Dame might end up with at the end of 2022. Now, they start things off with one of the most talked about games of the offseason. This is going to be a really good game. Notre Dame on the road at Ohio State. I don't care what you think about Notre Dame, and Lord knows Notre Dame's got its fair share of detractors and haters or whatever you want to call them. There aren't two bigger brands in all of college football than Notre Dame and Ohio State. You got Alabama, you got Texas, you got Oklahoma, whatever. You can name whatever teams you want to name. Ohio State and Notre Dame are two of the biggest brands in all of college football. They are worldwide brands, and this is a huge game. Shout out to Notre Dame and Ohio State for scheduling this home-and-home series. I'm looking forward to watching it both years. Starts out this year with Notre Dame going on the road at Ohio State. If you're taking over a team as a first-year head coach and you've never been a head coach before, I don't know if you can draw a tougher game than this. On the road at Ohio State. Now, Oregon has a first-year head coach who's never been a coach before, Dan Lanning, who has to play Georgia in week 1, another brutal draw for your first ever game as a head coach. That's technically a neutral site game, though. It's played in Atlanta. I don't know how neutral the crowd will be, but it's not, as far as the stadium goes, it's a neutral stadium. Marcus Freeman couldn't have drawn a much harder opponent to make his head college football coaching debut than have to play on the road in the Horseshoe against an Ohio State team that everybody's got ranked in their top 3. I personally have Ohio State ranked number 1 in my latest preseason poll, which was after spring practice. I'll be making my last preseason poll, by the way, the first week of August, but that's still a couple of weeks away. But a very tough draw for Notre Dame here. I'm going to be honest with you. I can't see Notre Dame beating Ohio State on the road, and the reasons are pretty simple. It's all of the reasons I talked about for the first 15 minutes of this video. It's hard to pick Notre Dame when they go up against a team that has elite wide receivers. Well, there's not a program in America right now that has more elite wide receivers than Ohio State. They've probably got 5 NFL wide receivers on their roster right now. And then when you look at Notre Dame offensively, can their wide receivers beat Ohio State's secondary? Now, I know Ohio State had a down year last year defensively, but they brought in a new defensive coordinator. And talent is not the issue on Ohio State's defense. It was a scheme and philosophy issue, a mindset issue, that they didn't play physical enough. I think Ohio State's defense is going to get fixed heading into 2022. I just can't see Notre Dame going on the road in week 1, Marcus Freeman's first game as a head coach. I guess technically his second game as a head coach because he did coach the Rose Bowl against Utah at the end of last season. But this is just a tough spot for Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman. No shame in losing this game on the road at Ohio State, but I do have Notre Dame starting 0-1. Then you get a home game against Marshall, a group of 5 team. Marshall, a respectable group of 5 team, has several national championships over the last 20 or 30 years. They're not beating Notre Dame. This is a game Notre Dame should win relatively easily. And I'm going to say the same thing about Cal. Cal is kind of a forgettable program. Pac-12 kind of in a sort of flux right now. We don't really know which direction that's going to go with some of those teams out there. Cal, in my opinion, is a borderline Power 5 team and program to start with. You get them at home. So after a road loss to start the season, you win a couple of home games in a row, and you're 2-1. And this brings us to a really interesting matchup here on the road at North Carolina. Now, North Carolina was receiving all kinds of hype this time last year heading into the 2021 season, and they completely flatlined. They were a very disappointing team in 2021. Sam Howell, who was on everyone's Heisman watch list heading into the season, very inconsistent last year, and North Carolina as a whole, very inconsistent. There was like a 10 or 11 game stretch where they won and lost every other game. Win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. Sam Howell would play good one week, play bad the next. Good one week, bad the next. He's gone. So, again, a situation where they got to find a brand new quarterback at North Carolina. But North Carolina's defense is going to be legit. I think North Carolina might have the second best defense in the ACC behind Clemson. NC State's defense is pretty good too. But North Carolina's been recruiting well under Mack Brown for several years now, and a lot of that has been on the defensive side of the ball, and the majority of those kids are juniors and seniors now. I think maybe the hype was a year early for North Carolina. If I had a crystal ball and you told me that North Carolina was going to get consistently good quarterback play in 2022, I think North Carolina's got a good shot at winning 10-plus games this year. But I don't have a crystal ball, and you can't predict quarterback play from somebody who's never really played before. This is not a guaranteed win for Notre Dame. This will be a tough opponent. It's a road game. However, I think Notre Dame gets the win. I think Notre Dame goes to Chapel Hill and beats the Tar Heels. They're 3-1 heading into the bye week. You come out of the bye week and you have another interesting game, this time against BYU, sort of a holy war here. Catholics versus the Mormons. God, can they both lose? Probably not. Type about it, I guess. I think Notre Dame beats BYU. BYU is a good team. They win a lot of games every year, but if you go back and look at BYU over the last couple of years, it seems like every time they play anybody really ranked in the top 10 or 15, they lose, and it's not even that close. I don't know if that'll be the case here. This is technically a neutral site game for no reason at all, played in Las Vegas, Nevada. Why anybody thinks we need to have a neutral site game in the middle of the season in Las Vegas, Nevada, between Notre Dame and BYU is beyond me. This kind of stuff is getting way out of hand, in my opinion, in college football. I bitch and moan and complain about this all the time. Call me crazy. I think college football games should be played on college campuses. I mean, I know that blows a lot of people's mind, but that's just how I feel. You're going to say, but Lou, you're a Georgia fan. What about the Georgia-Florida game? Yes, the Georgia-Florida game should be played in Athens one year, in Gainesville the next. It should be played on campuses. Same with Texas, Oklahoma. Same with all these other neutral site games. I mean, there's 5, 6 neutral site games in week 1 every year. You got pointless neutral site games like this in the middle of the season. It's just insane. Now, to be fair, this is something Notre Dame's been doing for a long time. And they played at the Packers Stadium. They've played in, I think, Yankee Stadium. They played in a lot of weird, pointless places where they had no business playing, but they do. And here you go again, a neutral site game against BYU for no reason at all, Las Vegas, Nevada. But I think you get the win. Then you come back home and you play Stanford. Stanford had one of the worst seasons last year they've had in a long time. Head coach David Shaw, in my opinion, hanging on by a string there. And that hurts me to say that because I've been a David Shaw fan over the years. I like his style and his approach and sort of his just general philosophy about the game of football. For whatever reason, a couple of years ago, though, he seemed to get away from that. Stanford used to remind me of almost of an SEC team on the West Coast. Big, huge offensive and defensive lines, punishing ground game. I mean, think about some of the great running backs that have come through there over the last 10 years. Bryce Love, Christian McCaffrey, whatever, on down the list. They got away from that a couple of years ago and went to more of a spread approach where they're trying to throw the ball around, and it just hasn't worked at all. They were terrible last year. They don't recruit. What are they in? I mean, do they even recruit in the top 50? It's hard for me to see David Shaw getting it turned around. And even if he does get it turned around, they just don't have the talent to compete with Notre Dame. I think you'll get the win there, no problem. You'll beat Stanford. You're also going to beat UNLV. Back-to-back home wins for you. UNLV, no match for Notre Dame talent-wise. That game should be over at halftime. On the road at Syracuse. Again, here, a coach that I think is on the way out in Dino Babers at Syracuse. Seems like a million years ago he had that 10-win season, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. What was that, 2018? It was a long time ago. Since then, I don't know if he's won more than 3 or 4 games in a season. I think this will be his last year at Syracuse. And unfortunately for my buddy Dino Babers, even though Notre Dame has to play on the road, doesn't matter. Notre Dame will get the win over Syracuse. Still just sitting on the 1 loss to Ohio State. And look, a loss to Ohio State, and that, what are you now? 1, 2, 3, 4. You're 7-1 heading into the last month of the season. Your only loss is on the road at Ohio State. It's possible you could be ranked in the top 5 at this point because I think Ohio State's going to be undefeated and ranked 1, 2, or 3. Notre Dame's not going to be much further behind at this point in the season. And then comes what is probably well, depending on what you think about the Ohio State game, this next game is either the biggest game of the season or the second biggest game of the season. You get this one at home, so you got to travel and play Ohio State, but you get this one at home, the Clemson Tigers. Now, Clemson is an extremely talented team, and a lot of people, I feel like a lot of people have the wrong idea about Clemson. If I had $1 for every time somebody told me, Lou, do you think Clemson's going to have a comeback season this year, or is it going to be terrible like they were last year? Terrible. They were 10-3. Weren't they 10-3? 10-3 or 11-2, whatever it was. I don't understand this narrative out here that Clemson fell off a cliff last year. Yeah, their offense was bad. DJ Ukulele played horrible. The offensive line was non-existent. Clemson's going to have probably the best defense in the country this year. They definitely have the best defensive line in the country. They probably have the best overall front 7 in the country and may have the best defense overall. The offense, they've got good talent. They've got some offensive line issues that they've got to get worked out in the offseason. And clearly, the quarterback has got to improve from last year. Now, if the offensive line improves, that's automatically going to help DJ improve a little bit, give him more time to throw. But still, even when he had time to throw last year, he didn't look great. I mean, look, there's no sugarcoating it. Clemson's offense last year was absolutely putrid. They were dead last in the country in yards per play, which is absolutely horrible. They have to get a lot better. But that defense is legit. And Clemson has recruited well for 5-6 years in a row. That roster is loaded with talent on both sides of the ball. They've got playmaking wide receivers. They like the running back, Will Shipley, is more than capable of putting together a great season. If Clemson's offensive line improves from last year and DJ takes a big step forward, Clemson could be a very dangerous team, possibly a playoff team. And they've got that young kid. What is it? Is it Cole Klubnik or Cade Klubnik or whatever his name is? I don't know. And we know, because we've seen it happen, Dabo Swinney is not afraid to bench a returning starter in favor of a freshman. We saw him do it with Kelly Bryant and Trevor Lawrence, right? Kelly Bryant took Clemson to the playoffs. By week 5 of the following season, he was benched for Trevor Lawrence. So Clemson opens up this year with Georgia Tech, right? If Clemson's offense is struggling against Georgia Tech in week 1, Dabo's not going to be afraid to put that young kid in and let him see what he can do. So who knows? It's possible DJ Uiagalelei won't even be the quarterback for Clemson at this point in the year. We can't know what we don't know, right? But we do know Dabo is one of a handful of coaches who is not afraid to yank a starting QB with a ton of experience to roll the dice on a young kid. Maybe Clemson does it, maybe they don't. Point is, Clemson's defense alone is good enough to make this an interesting game at home against Notre Dame. I do think Clemson's offense is going to be better in 2022 than it was in 2021. How much better, I think, depends totally on the quarterback situation. This game's on the road in Clemson. I think Notre Dame takes their second loss of the season here. I do think the Taters pull out a win. Notre Dame now sitting on 2 losses. Next up is Navy. Seems like Notre Dame plays them every single year. Notre Dame loves stacking up wins against service academies and then bragging that they don't play FCS schools, but that's neither here nor there for the purposes of this video. That's an argument for another day. You will beat Navy without a problem. Shout out to Navy, though. Y'all are good people, but you're not going to beat Notre Dame. Then Boston College. Boston College, a decent ACC team, has no business. Notre Dame. I mean, Boston College should not be competing with Notre Dame, though. I do like the quarterback there, Phil Jerkovic, whatever his name is. He'll have a pretty good season. And he may even put up some yards and some numbers on Notre Dame, but overall, Boston College can't compete with Notre Dame. I think you beat Boston College. This is Catholic versus Catholic violence here. Boston College, a Catholic school, of course. Notre Dame, a Catholic school as well. Catholic on Catholic hate here in this game. Notre Dame. Why is that red? Y'all are getting mad at me now, aren't you? Let me change it right now for you. Y'all really done got mad. Y'all thought I was trolling you, but I wasn't. Honestly, I just actually hit the wrong color, so I do apologize. Yes, you will beat Boston College. Don't worry about it. Last game of the year, Southern Cal. Now, I've already done a Southern Cal version of this video, so if you've seen that one, you know which way I go here. This is a losable game for both teams, okay? Southern Cal's at home. I think they're fully capable of winning this game. You know, Lincoln Riley is there now running the offense. I know Southern Cal was terrible last year, 4-8. And under normal circumstances, it would have taken anybody, Lincoln Riley included, several years to sort of pull Southern Cal out of the gutter. But because of the transfer portal, we're able to see much quicker turnarounds in college football now. Over half Southern Cal starters are going to be people from the transfer portal, including, of course, quarterback Caleb Williams, wide receiver Mario Williams, wide receiver Jordan Atkinson from Pitt, the running back from Oregon, a linebacker from Alabama or whatever it was. I mean, there's just going to be transfer players all over the field for Southern Cal. I think they're going to be a really, really good team. I think I picked them to go 9-3 overall or something like that. And you got to remember they were 4-8 last year. So Southern Cal is going to be more than capable of winning this game at home. And if Southern Cal is even a little bit better than I think they're going to be, they will win this game at home. With that being said, if you saw the Southern Cal video, then you already know I do think Notre Dame gets to win on the road at Southern Cal to finish the regular season 10-2. Now, I'm sure there's going to be some Notre Dame fans who disagree with me here. Maybe you think you're going to beat Clemson, and that's fine. Maybe you think you're going to beat Ohio State. That's fine, too. I feel like this is a pretty fair prediction for Notre Dame in a year where they've got a brand new coaching staff with a guy who really doesn't have any experience at being a head coach, uncertainty at the quarterback position, question marks at wide receiver, and no real depth at corner. I think 10-2 would be a really good season for Notre Dame. And even if they beat Clemson or Ohio State, I feel like I've got Notre Dame winning a couple of games here that could potentially turn into losses. I don't think the at North Carolina game is a guaranteed win for Notre Dame. I think it's possible Notre Dame could lose that one. Clearly, I think it's possible they could lose at the end of the season on the road at Southern Cal. But I've got them going 10-2. With losses to Ohio State and Clemson. Feel free to let me know down below where you think I'm wrong. What do you think Notre Dame's record is going to be in 2022? And not just the record either. If you think they're going 11-1, tell me what the loss is. If you think they're going 9-3, tell me what the 3 losses are. Let me know in the comment section down below. Please hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. That's a huge help to the video. and share the video out on your Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever the case. That's a huge help as well. All right, I appreciate everybody watching. Have a good morning.